My name is Scott Ringlein. I'm the president of the Energy Alliance Group of North America. We're a project developer for efficiency, conservation, and renewable energy projects. And today I'm going to talk about kind of the pre-design and design phase of kind of the commissioning process, where these types of items are considered and usually taken off the table primarily because of funding. So that's going to be the topic today and the discussion. All right. So one of the things I want to do is just kind of talk about a typical challenge that's out there for those that are involved in projects right from the get-go. This might be something that you guys see a lot. So, and this is actually coming from the case study that I'm going to talk about in the end, but this is kind of a typical challenge that we see out there. So, large facility needs a new roof. Cheapest quote is, over $500,000. Company has limited capital, and they're challenged with a payback target less than 3 years. And unless you have no insulation, putting on a new roof is really kind of a dead deal, because there is really no return unless you are planning on staying there for 50 years or so. So what's the typical outcome that we see? CEO forgoes the 3-year payback target and hands over the money. Typically that never happens. CEO approves just enough money to make the repairs, which is actually a non-capital usually. It's coming out of the expense. It's a little easier to get done. Or what we see most of the time is they improve internal resources to get up on the roof, patch it, and move on. And I can tell you, I've been on a zillion roofs. That's what I see. I get up there, there's a 5-gallon bucket of tar and a broom, and that's how they repair it. Or kick the can and say, maybe next year. So typically 3 and 4 are usually the things that we see get done. So why is this? Well, in the design phase and pre-design phase, 98% of all the efficiency, conservation, and renewable energy solutions that are put on the table are usually pulled off because of cost, initial cost. So that's what we're going to talk about is, how to change this from 98% unfunded to 98% funded. So this is a desired outcome we would all like to see, whether it's a roof or any other technology, is that one, you can secure the funding without any out-of-pocket cost. You get the new roof, and you're able to put in additional insulation that you need, and get a 25-year warranty. But on top of that, you're able to install a 1-megawatt solar array on the new roof, hit your payback targets in the first year, and achieve a positive ROI for a 25-year period. And that includes all your maintenance costs. So inverter replacement costs between 15 and 20 years, warranty on the roof, annual inspections, everything. Net cash flow increases, and the big bonus, CEO throws you a party. Now that may sound a little fictitious, but what we're going to talk about, other than the party, unless you got a great CEO, is the program that can actually make that happen. And so what I just described as far as the desired outcome, we're actually doing a project right now in South Dakota where they came to us with a building they had just purchased. It had a roof that is in just terrible, terrible shape. The complete facility is actually environmentally controlled because it's a freight house for frozen foods. And we went from, hey, can you get us a new roof or repair the roof to now we're actually replacing the entire roof and putting a 1 megawatt solar system on it, and it's costing them no capital. All right. So let's give you a little history lesson here on where PACE came from and what its structure is. So a long time ago, Ben Franklin came up with a method of collecting capital to do infrastructure projects, and it was called property assessed tax assessments. So those that, even if you own a house, on your property tax bill, you might see a tax assessment on there for a new pool at a school, sidewalks, road improvements, whatever. But the main purpose of it was to fund infrastructure improvements. So a new sewer line, how do they pay for it? It's mandatory, and they spread the cost on those that are going to benefit from it. So if you own a business on that road where they put a new sewer system, they put a tax assessment on your taxes, and you're going to pay for it when you own the property. When you sell the property, the next owner takes over that tax assessment because they're still benefiting from the improvement. It's secured by the property, not the owner, because it's a tax. All right, so they're not checking your credit when they do this. It just shows up on your tax bill. And again, when you sell or say you default on your property and it goes back on the local tax assessor's tax rolls, they're not coming after you as the owner. So that's the preface of what we're going to talk about here is property tax assessments. So in 2008, Cisco DeVry, he's from California, they were looking for a method to increase renewable energy usage in the state of California. And they said, well, why don't we consider buildings as infrastructure? They don't go away. They shouldn't go away. We see many times they do. But why don't we consider them infrastructure, but only use the assessment process for funding energy efficiency, water conservation, and renewable energy projects, which we go back to where I started. That's where these are all being considered, are in the kind of the pre and the design phase when they're in discussion. But what's different about this, it's voluntary. So if you're a building owner, you can actually request it rather than mandatory when it's an infrastructure improvement. Same thing, it's secured by the property, not the owner. And if you sell it or you default, it transfers it. So the structure of the program is identical to what they're using today for doing infrastructure programs, but now it's going to be applied to buildings itself. So now kind of have the foundation of the program. Let's get into all the details. You know, what is it? Where is it at? How does it work? And all that type of stuff. So first and foremost, the intent of it is to only fund energy efficiency, water conservation, and renewable energy projects. But the beauty of the project is for each of these, there's more to it than just replacing a light bulb or going to low-flow toilets. It could be infrastructure of the building. So, hey, we might have to recommission the entire building to install these products or improvements. All those costs are considered. The other thing that's different about this is that it's actually a state law. So, PACE, or Property Assessed Clean Energy, this actual legislation, it's approved at the state level, but the state does not collect property taxes. So it has to be adopted locally. So what they do is they create these PACE districts, whether it's county, townships, cities, even in the state of Ohio now, they're able to create districts around a building or, say, an industrial park. So this is not like something that came out of the banking industry. Yes?
Not every state already have.
Not every state, and I'll talk about that, but not every state yet. And even if a state has it, it may not be adopted locally where your facility is or where your clients are. So it's secured by the property. And there's no personal guarantee. So again, they're not going in and looking for some type of guarantee either by the company or the owner themselves. It's secured by the property itself, the value of the property. It's non-recourse. So if you default, can't make your payments, they're not going to come after you. They're going to take the property, just like in any other property tax transaction or default. Property becomes property is then owned by whoever is collecting the taxes, and it runs with the land. So this is really, really important, especially with a lot of our commercial property owners, where they're buying a property, they're improving it, they're going to hold it for a few years, and then they want to sell it. No recourse in doing so, because with property taxes or a tax assessment, you're not paying off that principal when you sell the property. It runs with the land. It transfers to the next owner because the improvements still stay with the property. The next owner benefits from those, and they're going to continue to pay for them. So it's not like a piece of equipment that the owner is going to pick up and carry with him to their next building. These are really building infrastructure improvements. Here's why it works, and I'm going to go in more detail about this, but since it's a tax assessment, tax assessments are done for long-term improvements. So typically you can secure funding for 20 to 25 years, in states upwards to 30 years. So in California, they're actually using this tool to improve buildings for earthquakes. In Florida, they're using it to improve buildings for hurricanes. So these are long-term fixes, so you can get access to capital. And it's fixed rate. So it's a fixed rate, fixed term assessment. From the financial standpoint, it's repaid as a property tax. So it's not considered a debt on the balance sheet. It's not a liability. It's just a cost of doing business, no difference than a property tax. No down payment required, and 100% of the costs are covered through the assessment. So this is everything. We were just talking about commissioning, how a lot of people don't want to include commissioning because of the expense. This will cover all those costs. Engineering, legal fees, everything is going to be included in the cost. When you have 20 to 25 years to do these types of projects, the beauty is that in most cases, the savings is going to be greater than the cost. So we call that the savings to cost ratio has to be greater than 1. In some states, it's law. So you actually have to guarantee it. We're based out of Michigan. Any project greater than $250,000, whoever the developer is for the program, has to guarantee that savings to cost ratio. But what's different about this compared to typical capital projects, you look at true life cycle costs. You're not just looking at initial capital, because typically the CEO wants to keep his initial capital down. Well, efficiency is not meant to be cheap. It's meant to be what? Efficient. And because it's an infrastructure improvement, the program is set up to make sure that whatever's put in place is maintained over the life of the improvement, because it's part of the property. You sell the place in 10 years, they want to make sure that the chiller's been maintained, HVAC system's maintained, lighting has been replaced when it's burnt out. All these costs are loaded into the models that we do. And we're really doing a comparison between what are you doing today, what are you doing tomorrow, including all your replacement costs, maintenance costs, and we're including energy increases and inflation, which for us in the capital world and for us in the commissioning side, typically these are not even in the conversation. Nobody's talking about long-term maintenance of capital. They're looking at how much is it going to cost me and when can I pay it off? and they want to keep the costs down. The other thing, because you're improving the building itself, it's treated as real property, not personal property. So your property value actually goes up. And in the calculation to determine how much you can access from a funding standpoint, we take advantage of the value of the improvement. And so this is set by the lender, but sometimes we have lenders that will actually take 90% of the improvement added on to the value of the property to establish what the overall value of the property is going to be. As I already touched on, it's an expense, not a debt. So it's not affecting the credit of either the owner or the company. And so it's not affecting their borrowing power. So what I always tell our clients is, hey, why don't you use the money to improve your process rather than improving the building? Because the process, that goes, right instantly back into their pocket, rather than the building it takes forever to pay for. The other thing, it doesn't affect any of the incentives that come with these types of improvements. So on the renewable side, you still qualify for your federal tax credits and incentives. Your local utility credits are still there. You can depreciate it, the capital, just like you would. So no effect on any of that. It's treated just like any other project. All right, where is PACE? The gentleman asked about that. So the program actually originated in California in 2008. It's now in 35 states, including District of Columbia, and it has now moved outside of the US. It's in Australia, it's in Canada, and Europe has launched it, and there's a lot of other countries that are looking at using this to improve buildings. It's also being used to improve residential, so single-family homes, although this is not part of the conversation, but it is being used to improve single-family homes. The intent of this is really the industrial, commercial, multifamily side of the business. So what projects qualify? So the one thing you'll find out is, because this is a state law rather than a federal law, every state is going to have different rules on how to use this mechanism. But for the most part, facility upgrades, so large retro projects, new construction. So this is what I really like about the program, is in new construction. This is what we're talking about, the pre-design and the design phase, when you're having these conversations, whether you're going to include these. In new construction, you have code. And I like to pick on light bulbs, but it's easy in Michigan. So in the state of Michigan, we can still use metal halide in a parking lot. 40-year-old technology, they still allow it. So if we replace it with an LED, of course, there's a cost for that improvement, but PACE would pay for that entire cost. And in new construction, it's not only paying for, say, the fixture itself, it's also paying for the wiring, the control panel, the controls, all the labor to do it. So that's the benefit of utilizing this tool in a new construction phase versus just a facility upgrade. Process improvements. So there's a lot of processes out there. I spent 30 years in the automotive, a lot of focus on manufacturing. The process itself utilizes what? Maybe a lot of water or maybe a lot of power. It can be used to improve the process, reduce your utilities, but the downfall of it is if you're going to move your facility, into a new facility, or you're going to sell and you want to move in a new facility, remember, this is part of the building. It's not supposed to be moved. So in this case, if you have a PACE assessment against a process improvement or maybe a piece of equipment that's part of a process, you would basically have to pay that off and then move it with you and take it off the tax rolls. The other thing is refinancing of prior projects. So this varies by state, but we have been involved where projects were done either a couple of years ago. So we walked into a building, it was an old Sears building. They completely refurbished it, put in a geothermal system, triple pane windows, LED lighting. It was done within the last 2 years. They qualified to take an assessment to actually move those costs off their balance sheet as a debt over to an expense. What technologies qualify? So again, every state is different, but the way we look at it, if you can calculate an energy savings or some type of conservation of water, most likely it will qualify. And this includes control. So, control systems and stuff like that, you can show a savings, they would also qualify. So where's all this money coming from? Varies state to state, but some states are using private bonds. So first and foremost, if you ever have a conversation about this, it is not using tax dollars, all right? All the money for this comes through private equity funding. So they'll go out and raise bonds to pay for PACE assessment improvements. Ohio uses it, California uses it. Those are two primary states that are actually using a bond mechanism. Self-funding. In some states, they allow companies that have a separate entity that is managing money to actually fund the project. The beauty here is that a lot of the money that's sitting out there is only making maybe 2 to 4%. But if I can fund a PACE project, show that it's still cash flow positive at like a 7% cost of money, well, you just actually increased your margin on the money that you're investing, and now you're investing it into your own operation. If you sell, it becomes an annuity because the next owner is going to actually pay for it. Most of the money is coming from private equity funds. So these are large companies that are managing trusts, 401ks, pension funds, stuff like that. Actually, one of the projects that I'm going to talk about here in a case study, it's actually owned by a teacher pension fund out of California. And so they're considering actually self-funding it because then they would be paying themselves for the improvements of the project. And then lastly, traditional funding. Some banks are starting to get into it. The problem is with their underwriters, they just don't have the appetite for it, especially when you're getting into these 20 and 25-year terms. So how much is available? So the one thing is, after the market crash in the mid-2000s, you can't go out and borrow, 150% of the value of your property anymore. So it is limited. Typically, it's about 20 to 30% of what's called the PACE fair market value. And this is a little different than just a traditional appraised value because we're able to use the cost of the improvements, a portion of the cost improvements, and it ranges anywhere from 50 to 90%. So kind of what builds us up, property value is number one because you're taking an assessment out against the value. Loan to value, so if you have a debt on the property, they're going to limit you to the amount of debt that can be put against the property itself. Annual energy spend. Remember, we're trying to reduce utility cost, water cost. So if you have a property that's worth, say, $1 million, but you have a very, very small utility expense, even though you could get 20 to 30% of that $1 million, you just don't have the energy offset to cover the cost. So those are things that are going to be looked at. And then, of course, the percent of value by the lender and the percent of value by the PACE district. So we have lenders that we work with. They'll go up to 95% loan to value of the property. We have others that are typically 80 to 70%, but rule of thumb is typically 80%. So to kind of give you an example of what kind of money is out there, on the left-hand side, we have property values. And then we say, does it have a mortgage or not a mortgage? Meaning, does it have a debt or a lien against the property already where it's already using some of its loan to value? So for instance, you got a building that's worth $5 million, you can get an assessment in the range of $1 to $2 million to do these types of improvements. So that's a lot of capital that's not being taken from the company itself to do these types of improvements. It's just an expense. So who qualifies for PACE? As we talked about, first of all, you got to be in a state that has PACE, but more importantly, the property is in the PACE district. And I will share a couple of websites that you can go to find out this type of information. Also, it can be used for-profit, nonprofit, and in some states, government-owned buildings. So today, the only state that we know of is Ohio. And the reason why that is the bond structure that they use is actually a public bond that can only be used for funding PACE programs. So it allows them to use it for PACE or for public entities. So if you look at case studies that have been done in Ohio, most of them have been done to public buildings, where most states do not allow it because government is not paying any taxes at all. For nonprofits, they don't pay typical taxes, but they can take on an assessment to actually improve the property. One of the projects that we're working on right now is actually for Habitat for Humanity in Michigan. And they're able to take the assessment and actually make the improvements. Business has to be in good standing, and you got to pay your bills. And believe it or not, this is probably the most important thing that they look at, because a lot of people, they defer paying property taxes. And when that happens, most of the time they will not qualify for this. And then, as I said before, typically loan to value, including the PACE assessment, it has to be less than 80%. But the beauty of PACE is this is not a one-time thing. A PACE assessment or just a property tax assessment can be done multiple times. And since it's based on the value of the property, you do one upgrade, you utilize PACE for it. Over a period of years, your loan to value is going down because you're paying it off. Your property value is increasing because typically property values go up. Guess what? You can go back and do another assessment. So some of the projects that we do, Habitat for Humanity is one of them. First thing we're doing is roof and HVAC. Next thing we're doing is lighting, and then the last thing we're doing is solar. So it's something that you can build into a facility over a longer period of time for improvements. So this is why it works. So I'm going to show you a chart here. On the left-hand side, we got the types of improvements and kind of the expected cost. On the bottom side, we're looking at payback years. So this is a traditional funding mechanism that's out there today. This is what we deal with today when we go out and we ask for capital to do these types of improvements. So in a study that was done in 2016 by the National Facility Management and Technology Organization, 95% of the companies out there want a payback, simple payback in less than 7 years. And out of 95%, almost 99% of it want it done in 3 years or less. So guess what? The only thing that's being done today is the cherry pick, lighting and HVAC. You can get a quicker return on investment, especially with lighting. So it's easier to incorporate these into a project, the same with traditional HVAC. But then when you get into big capital costs, chillers, windows, roofs, solar, nobody's doing it because it will never, ever meet these payback hurdles that they have in place. It's an archaic system because no one looks at life cycle cost when they're looking at capital. They're only looking at initial cost. And I'll tell you, I'll go into 100 buildings and 90 of them will have the original roof. A lot of it is the original HVAC. And of course, a lot of it is original lighting and single pane windows. It is miraculous. And the thing is that everyone has the opportunity to pay for it because they're already paying for it. Every month when they pay their utility bill, the cost to do the upgrades are there. It's just they're using an archaic system to go get the capital to do it because they're looking at initial cost and they got to meet these, random payback numbers. So how does that compare to the PACE model? So here, the only thing that I changed is the funding term on the bottom. We're still going to look at payback years, but funding term. Now, I can go out and I can secure 25 years fixed rate money for a new roof, new windows, a new chiller, or incorporating these into a new project, higher efficiency, water conservation, renewable energy. Now, I can do everything. So we're doing roofs, we're doing solar, we're doing windows, chillers, lighting, you name it. We're incorporating all these either into a new design or into a retrofit because of the funding mechanism. It's not the technology. Technology's been around for a long time. It's all about the money, 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 as they say. So does it work? So I pulled this off of a website that tracks all this stuff just a couple of weeks ago. So since 2008, there has been close to $900 million worth of projects done all over the US in a very, very wide variety of clients. So industrial, commercial, churches, nonprofits, school systems, and every type of improvement that you can think of too. All right, so now that I talked about it, go over some case studies. The first one was the roof replacement in the 1 megawatt solar system that I talked about originally. But then the second one is a comprehensive lighting replacement and incorporating controls. Because today their controls are switches, and that's it. So this client, they purchased a 125,000 square foot warehouse. It's in the food industry. They were actually leasing the building, but that's where all their finished product goes, and that's where it's shipped out. And it's an operation. It runs 24/7, 365. The roof is poor, and if you could rate it even less poor, we would. But there's little or no insulation in an environmentally controlled building, and the roof just needs to be replaced. This particular client, of course, no capital budget for these types of improvements, and their internal payback target is 2.5 years. So a roof is not on their target for capital expense. $500K to just replace it and $110 to repair it. And that $500,000 did not even include any insulation, nor did it include a long-term warranty. So the original quote that they got was just for a roof replacement, standard 10-year warranty, and no insulation. The other thing is they have some very, very extreme corporate sustainability targets. This is actually how we met them because we questioned how they were going to achieve them from a corporate level. This is a Fortune 50 company based in the US. And so hence that's why we looked at incorporating renewables. And they have a low energy cost. This is in South Dakota. It's cold country. It's fairly cheap to buy power there. So what does the proposal include? A new roof with a 25-year warranty, additional insulation, and putting in a 1 megawatt rooftop solar array with a 25-year panel warranty. And believe it or not, 1 megawatt only displaces 1% of the annual power they use. It's a massive facility from the operation standpoint, it's over 1 million square feet that, again, it operates 24/7, 365, and the entire facility is basically a refrigerator or a freezer. So what did we do? We secured $2.3 million in PACE funding. It's 25 years, fixed rate of 7%. 100% of the project costs are being covered, so no out-of-pocket costs are coming from the company themselves. And the beauty of PACE is that if there is any upfront costs that are required, say you want to hire a lawyer to look over some legal documents or something like that, those costs are covered when the funding comes in. Also, what's included is an annual maintenance program and replacement of the inverters out 20 years. So basically, we're taking the cost of the inverter today, and with a inflation rate of, I think it's 2.8%, we're then building in what that cost is going to be 15 to 20 years out there. So all the maintenance cost, annual inspection of the roof, annual inspection of the system, controls, everything. So built into the model, their annual energy cost increase over the last 50 years has been approximately 3.1%, and the local inflation rate is about 2.8%. Again, that's built into the model for the 25-year period. And as I noted before, all the incentives are included. So not only do they get their federal tax credits, but with the latest law changes to the tax and stuff out of the new administration, the roof, they can accelerate and depreciate 100% of the cost in year one. So it's very front-loaded, which really helps the model. So within the first 5 years, they're getting all those costs back through accelerated depreciation and the tax credits. So here's a summary. Total project cost, $2.3 million. Term and rate, 25 years, 7%, I'm sorry. So the average annual savings, this is over a 25-year period. Their average annual savings is a little over $200,000, where the actual cost is only $195,000. So this is where the cash flow comes from right here. There's your lifetime savings, lifetime payments, and then what the CEO loves are these numbers. First year return on investment, almost 480%. Why? Because we're taking advantage of all the credits and everything right up front, and then we can utilize that over a 25-year period. Second case study. So this is one that we're working on currently right now in Michigan. So this is a 50-year-old facility. It's a commercial property, over 400,000 square feet. It was built back in 1965 through 1975, all original lighting. There's 1,800 different types of fixtures and bulbs. They're still using metal halides in recessed lighting. They also have a 12-acre parking lot. There's 77,000-watt metal halide bulbs, 42 poles, 15 cement bases in very poor condition. The poles have never, ever been replaced. Cement bases have never been replaced. And there's no wireless controls. There is a building management system in place. It is archaic. It's still vacuum controlled. Everything is either a manual timer, switches, stuff like that. Average cost of energy is around 10 cents per kilowatt hours. And their number one thing when they came to us is they said, we don't want to take any money out of our pocket, and we don't want to have to maintain anything. So that was really our goal, was to show them how we could do this without any out-of-pocket cost and incorporate a maintenance program over the term. So the proposal includes all new lighting, interior, exterior, all new poles, bases, everything, All the lighting and stuff comes with a 10-year warranty. Wire mesh control systems for all the lighting. And they are now discussing adding in some HVAC improvements and also a building management system. All new parking lot poles. We're replacing 15 cement bases. And it comes with a 20-year maintenance and end-of-life replacement program. So they will not touch, they will not have to service any of the lighting for a 20-year period. Where today, that's all they do. They got a guy working every single day on a lift replacing bulbs. So the total project costs about $1.36 million. 20 years at 7.5%. Again, 100% of the project cost covered and no out-of-pocket costs incurred. And that includes the maintenance. So it's not like in 10 years we're going to come back to them and say, hey, we need a bunch of money to replace all the bulbs that have burned out. Inflation and annual energy cost increases within the state of Michigan, 2.5%. And of course, they qualify for all the utility incentives, and there are some tax strategies that they're actually going to look into from a abandonment clause. So believe it or not, all those light bulbs that everybody takes out and throws away, in the IRS minds, they actually still have some type of residual value. So everything that we actually take out and abandon, they'll be able to get a tax credit for. So here's kind of the summary of the financials. Cost, the term, and the rate. This is a big one. So their average annual savings is close to $240,000, where their annual payments are only $193,000. Lifetime savings, 4.8. Payments, 3.8. And then return on investment year 1, 30%, 15%, and 24%. And the reason why you'll see such a variance between this and like the roof is that a lot of their lights are on 24/7. So that means within a 10 to 12 year period, there's going to be a huge capital outlay from the maintenance side to replace all that. So we take that all into consideration, the equipment, the labor, all your lift rentals and stuff to actually do this, and we're predicting the cost into the future, including the annual increases because of inflation. But the important thing here is that it's cash flow positive from day one, and they didn't use any of their capital. And again, this is the facility that's owned by a teacher pension fund out of California, so they're actually looking at doing the investment themselves. So, what's that? This is everything. So this was the entire facility, parking lot, and the whole kit and caboodle. Yeah, yep. All right. So I'm a big fan of self-education. You know, you guys don't know who I am, but I want to leave you guys with a couple of websites to go out, find out about the program, where it's at, how it's being used. There's case studies and stuff like that. So the two sites, one is Desire, and this is actually run by the Department of Energy and University of North Carolina. You can go in there, pick your state, and see every incentive, credit, everything for that particular state. It also includes PACE. But more importantly, PACE Nation is a nonprofit group based out of DC. They track everything about this program. All the legislation, where it's at, what districts have been established, all the legal side of things, and even kind of a toolkit if if you're in an area where it doesn't exist and you want to get involved in getting this approved, what are the steps to do it? So in most states, there's an administrator that kind of oversees the entire program. And the same thing at a district level, somebody's going to actually be an independent third party that manages all of this. The nice thing about PACE Nation is they have a large volume of case studies to look at projects that have been done all across the US with this. And so there's a lot of information where Desire is only going to tell you whether or not it's there, where Pace Nation is going to give you all the facts. All right, so that's the end. Questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Just a quick comment on this. We were able to, out in Little Rock, Arkansas, I was able to get PACE financing for a 500 kilowatt array at a glass manufacturing company, so that was just a really cool thing.
Good for you, yeah.
I had a few questions that I think that you answered during the presentation, but I just want to be clear on. The funding term depends on the district that you're in?
It could depend on the district, the lender themselves, but more importantly, what is it that you're improving? So, you know, if you're only doing lighting and it doesn't include any maintenance, it's just a replacement, well, they're not going to pay for 25 years if the product is only going to last, say, 10 years. So they would limit you there. But more importantly is that it gives you an opportunity to not just do lighting. You know, lighting is where you create a lot of savings. Why not do lighting in a roof and windows? Because now I can take the savings from the lighting, spread it across the roof and windows, and I can get a 25-year fixed rate with lighting including the replacement cost. Great question. Yep.
I think that you touched on this with the inverter, but can capital avoidance be included in the? Okay.
100%. That's the other beauty of this program. So another project that we did was up in New York for a hotel. They had issues with maintaining power. So they lose power, they're throwing food away, they're going to have to rent a generator, and they're losing revenue because of cancellations, or people just aren't going to come because power is out. All those types of costs, they can be included in your financial model because they're deferred. You're actually going to displace them. So what we put in, solar and battery system, so that they had enough power for a certain period of time where they could get stuff in place if needed. But more importantly, they weren't throwing food away, and they weren't, you know, losing their revenue from people checking out because there was no power. Great question.
One final
Yeah.
question is, what kind of documentation is required for funding something like an operations and maintenance program, for example, filter replacement that you mentioned? Because savings calculations can be really difficult.
Yes. So again, it's going to vary by state. I'll talk about like Massachusetts. They use the local utility, kind of their PE group, as an independent third party that's actually looking at your cost calculations and stuff like that. So we're doing a CHP program out there right now. And so they're out there really as a, we'll call them a commissioning group, but they're the oversight. There are other states where there's nothing. I mean, there's really no oversight or anything. They're relying on the developer themselves and the costs they have incorporated. But most importantly is, you know, the savings to cost ratio has to be typically greater than 1. And a lot of states are mandating that it's guaranteed by the developer. So when you're sticking your neck out there, you're going to spend a lot more time looking at the cost incorporated into the model. Yeah, go ahead.
Two main questions. Number one is, if I'm the property owner, I have the ability to get funding. I see the 7%, 7.5%. We are not really the lowest you can get.
Well, with PACE funding, again, it's coming out of the private sector. They're usually using 10-year treasury plus so many basis points. So rule of thumb, 10-year treasury plus 450 basis points. There are other funds out there, like some of the bond funds. They're cheaper. So in the state of Ohio, it might be 4.5%. But what we've seen in Ohio is that their fixed costs from like administration and closing are much higher. So you just have to look. And what I will tell you, there are literally hundreds now of these investment groups that are funding these projects. Why? There's absolutely no risk. If it defaults and the property is sold, what's the first dollar that comes out? Tax. Not the mortgage, not the equipment lease debt, it's tax. So they're guaranteed that they're going to get their money back or a majority of the money back. And it's just like any other tax. It's just the annual payment that's accruing. It's, if somebody comes in and buys it, they don't have to pay off the entire assessment. They're only paying off the payments that have accrued if the property's been sitting there for 5 years. So that's the benefit to the investor, but also the benefit to the local community. And it can be used as an economic development tool because you have empty buildings sitting there on the tax rolls that need improvement, and no companies want to come in and pay that type of money. They want to come in and what? Walk into a building that's operational. So now they can use this PACE assessment, if they're a PACE district, to fund these improvements without taking capital out of their operation.
Yeah, so if I'm a CFO of a firm, I would ask this question, why do we go PACE if we can get a lower rate somewhere else? I guess we cannot, so that's number one. And then if I have personal investment money available, so there's a channel we can kind of fund those.
That's correct. That's correct, yeah. Yep.
Maybe we can get more for this. Okay, the second question is, it seems like this whole program can run by itself. If you look at you get bonds, you get other funding source, and you actually loan out to these property owners at 7.5%. There's enough profit margin to run this as a kind of independent business. Why did the tax need to get more?
Because typically, when you're looking at a capital improvement, two main things: payback and the debt side of it on their balance sheet. So you talked about the cost of money. So I'll get into meetings and they'll say, well, how much is this money going to cost me? And I'm like, well, it's not going to cost you anything, but the rate is 7%. Oh, I can get money cheaper than that. All right, let's go get the money and do the project. Oh, well, I can't do that because I can never meet my internal rate of return of 3 years. You can get cheap money. Even at 1%, nobody is replacing roofs, replacing windows, making huge infrastructure improvements on buildings. Why? Because of the rules they have in place on payback. Ooh, I need to see simple payback in 2 years. You're just not going to see that in a lot of these improvements. Where with PACE, you're going to see a payback in year one. Why? Because I can push the term out for 25, 30 years. And you're not going to go to a bank or a traditional lender and get 25 or 30-year terms for these types of improvements. You'll be lucky to, I work in the renewable energy industry. 10, maybe 15 years max is what you're going to get for those types of improvements. CHP, we're doing a CHP project. 10-year max that's allowed. Why? I don't know. It's a 20, 25-year piece of equipment, but that's what's going on in the market from a risk-averse lender.
But eventually they're going to pay this. It's just paid through a longer term. It's more like looking this at a different angle. Mm-hmm.
But they don't. That's the thing. And the other thing too is that it takes the risk and it removes it from the company or the owner and it puts it all on the building. Where if they're going out and getting traditional debt to do these improvements, they are taking on that liability, right? So if they default, who's the lender going after? Them. Where with PACE, nobody's going after them because it's the property itself. They maintain the property.
Is this more like, the loans, that reverse loan? Is that
reverse mortgage, you mean, or? Yeah. Yeah, in essence, yeah, you're correct. But even with the, with the reverse mortgage, it's not mandated that it's used for improving the property. It's just a way to get access to capital. And so that's why this is restricted to, hey, if you get this money, you have to improve the property. And that's why there's an administrator that's kind of the oversight to make sure that it's being done properly. And from a legal standpoint, that's why there's an administrator to take care of all the legal stuff as far as the filings and stuff like that. But you're certainly on point that there is a business out there, and that's why there's so many like PACE lenders out there, because they have trillions of dollars sitting in treasuries making 2% right now. Literally trillions of dollars are available out there to do these projects. The big thing is nobody knows about it. Nobody, so it's a lot of education. Any other questions? All right, thanks everyone.